talking about, hello royalty to queens. Today we're talking all about the conscious parent. And are you parenting from a place of ego? Yes, we're talking all about egos and parenting and why we can parent differently. Hi, AM Carbonero. Thank you for joining. Just going to wait for a second and let some people come in. But yes, this is the book that is the topic of conversation today. Let's see. That's sad. Yes, most parents are ego-driven. That's what people know. That's actually how the majority of us parent. Hi, Ines Arslem. Hi, I am wrapping you. Thank you so much for joining. Hello, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for being here. AM Carbonero, so I have to ignore them. Yes. For those of you that are joining for the first time, hi, my name is Brooke-Sidney, and my company is called Bella and the Babe, and you can find it at bellaandthebabe.com, and it is all about empowering authentic mothering. And so today we are picking up where we've left off before. We have been covering the amazing book. Hi, I am wrapping. Oh, thank you so much. We are picking up, let's see, we have Diego Torres from Brazil. Ooh, thank you so much for joining. Dorfino has just joined. I'm sorry if I've missed some of the names and some of the hellos. I'd love for you to tell me where you are scoping in from. What part of the world are you coming from? Hello. I see all these awesome names. For those of you who don't know, AM Carbonero says, hello, I'm from University of Michigan. Hello. Thank you for coming in from University of Michigan. I hope you're having great weather there. I am wrapping you, says California. Diego Torres says, do you not understand English? Can you speak Portuguese? No, I wish that I could. I wish that I could. I don't speak Portuguese, unfortunately. I speak a little Spanish, but no Portuguese. So thank you so much for joining. Today, hello Turquoise Boho, thank you for joining. Today we are talking about ego and parenting. And for those of you that have been with me for the past couple weeks, we have been talking about the conscious parent. And we left off on chapter 4, which is all about the ego. In fact, oh, thank you so much for the hearts. I love getting hearts. I know that it makes me know I'm resonating, or I'm saying something that makes sense to you all, or that's useful, which is why I'm here. So we left off last week, or maybe a week and a half or so ago, talking about chapter 4. And chapter 4 is all about the blow to the ego. And it's a really big chapter, so I decided to cut it in half because it was too much. It's just a lot to take in. But to do kind of a brief recap, basically, we talked about how, we basically want to fully accept our children, and to do so, we have to lose our ego. Because to be very quick and succinct, having too much ego in our parenting relationships prevents us from being authentic, and that blocks connection with our children. So it's kind of just, if I was going to make it just a really simple and easy way to think about it, the ego prevents us from being authentic because we're attaching ourselves to some ideal that's not real. And that lack of authenticity prevents us from having a great connection with our children. Thanks, Day Rowan, for joining in. So today we are picking up on the different types of ways that ego can show up in our parenting relationship. And that's the reason why I decided to break it into 2 sections, is because the first time we were talking about, hey, what the heck is ego and why does it matter in our parenting relationships? And this time, I think it's really important for us to kind of walk through and understand some of the major ways that the ego does show up. Shannon said it's not about us, it's about our kids. Yes, Shannon, that's exactly right. And that message is at the heart of Dr. Shefali's work. It's the reason why, honestly, she gets some slack from parents, is because they want to make challenges with their children about the children and not about anything that has to do with themselves. Oh, thank you so much for the hearts. And it really does. It has a lot to do with how we are showing up to our kids or not showing up in the instance of not being present and not being there for our children or being too full of ego. So let's talk about the 4 different types of ego that often show up in our parenting relationships. And I encourage you to share the ones that either you know that you may fall into doing or that you saw your parents do. Because oftentimes, especially if you've already had, I think his name was Carbonaro, Mr. University of Michigan, you know, he was already mentioning how his parents have parented him. And you know what? That's the first step in not continuing the pattern, not having ancestral or generational egoic patterns continue through. So thanks, Gabrielle, for joining. So the first type of ego that often shows up in parenting relationships is the ego, hello, Gabrielle. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you so much for joining. The first type of ego that shows up is called the ego of image. And that's basically where we fall into the trap of allowing our sense of worth to become entangled with our children's behavior. Shannon says, I think we worry too much about what people will think about us because of our kids. That's exactly it. That's exactly the ego of image. It also falls into the ego of status as well, which comes up a little bit later on, but that's exactly it. Parents worry so much about what their children do because they view their children as not separate from themselves, and they worry about what people think. And we're in a society where image is everything, right? Like, image is totally like the most important thing to a lot of people. And Carbonaro says parents want to shape their children. Yes, they totally do. And honestly, like that's not a bad intention to want to shape your children. You just have to be really conscious of what you're shaping them with, right? Like what messages you're sending to them. But in the book, Dr. Shefali has a really great, hi, Admired Red Rose, thank you for coming. A.M. Carpenter says, but without letting them make their own choices. Yes, that is the danger of being too egoic in our relationships, A.M. Carbonaro. Admired Red Rose says, hello, hi, thank you so much for joining. So what happens, again, a good way to think about the ego of image is if your child does something that you don't like, and then instead of addressing perhaps what's going on with the child, you make that child's behavior a reflection on your parenting. And Dr. Shefali gives a great example in the book where a kid got into a fight at school and the mother immediately went into the defensive, defending her child because she took it as a reflection upon her and didn't really ever make it about the child and what the child was going through. And that was all because she got caught into this ego of image, what she looked like, what her parenting looked like. So I don't know like how many of you guys struggle with ego of image or if you grew up in a household that you saw that, but I really think that that's a prevalent one in today's society where image is everything, and we're always putting, images on Facebook and Instagram and all these places because we want to look good, and we definitely want to be thought of as great-looking parents. Shannon says, "Oh yes," right? Like, if you agree with that, let me know. But I totally see it. Thank you for the hearts. Yeah, if you agree with that, I see the ego of image all the time. And honestly, it's because it's the norm. It's very easy to see that. So, it says you have long hair. Yes, I do. The second one is the ego of perfection. And that's really where we have an attachment to our fantasies of being perfect. And what that does is it really keeps us from living the life that we have. And so in that particular example in the book, Dr. Shefali talks about a mother who threw a party for her son, and she was really focused on every detail being perfect. And the fact that her son, I think, got a little tipsy and some of the details didn't work out, she was thrown off kilter, she was lashing out at people, and she was really trying to control. That's what the ego of perfection causes you to do, to try to control everything. And so, in addition to not being able to enjoy this party and all of her hard work, she made everyone else around her miserable. And honestly, she didn't really teach her child anything that was positive about, making mistakes, or that things happen, or that, nothing is perfect. And I think that Dr. Shefali, I think that she wrote this in the book, or else I just got it from something else that I've learned, but what our children need to learn is that perfection is an ideal of the foolish. I'm going to say that again. Perfection is an ideal of the foolish, because you know what? Perfection does not exist. And so that really shouldn't be the standard. And so when we hold our children to this unattainable standard, they have nowhere to go with that. Admired Red Rose says, all of my kids are grown, but will help with my new twin grands. Yes, that are 2.5 months. Yes, totally. And you can pass this information on to your older children, and also modeling it. By you modeling it to your grandchildren, they're going to have this great, great example. But back to the ego of perfection. Yeah, we want to encourage our children to see themselves as imperfectly perfect. That's kind of how I think of it, right? Like we are all flawed, and that is okay. And by doing that, instead of encouraging this false perfection, it allows our children to be real and to experience the moments of where they are. So I really thought this one was really powerful. It says, Dr. Shefali writes, we do ourselves and our children a favor when we accept our limitations and exude an okayness with being okay. Children are encouraged to become comfortable with who they are. Admired Red Rose says, I agree. Yes, totally. Children are encouraged to become comfortable with who they are, able to see the humor and lightness in themselves, and thereby detach from the impossible rigidity of their ego. I love that, because basically when we stop saying or trying to be perfect, which is not realistic, we free our children from trying to be perfect and allow them to just be, which allows them to grow and flourish and become who they really are supposed to be. So then the third one is the ego of status. And this one is very similar to image, because status is a very big thing for most parents. It's a really big thing in our society. It's so important that we have the right car, we go to the right schools, Ivy League schools, or whatever it is. Maybe it's going to the alma mater, or where everyone in your family went. There's all these external yardsticks, such as like a high-paying job, making a certain amount of money. And when we're too attached to those measuring sticks, we put them onto our children. We unfairly place those onto our children. And we overlook the fact that our children are here for their own purpose and their own calling. Thank you, CK Nova, for joining. Thank you so much for the hearts. And so the challenge for us as parents is to allow our children's spirit to emerge and not place all that junk on them, right? Like not place all this status, all this outside kind of interference. Thank you, Mumtaz Turkin, for joining. All of this onto them. She asked us, can you let go of the relentless urge to have children be an extension of yourself? And this goes back to, basically what things we were talking about in chapter 1, where how many of us thought our children were going to be mini-me's, right? We are so attached to our children. Thank you, Admired Red Rose, for sharing on Twitter. We expect our children to turn out just like us, have the same standards, right or wrong, as we are, and we place them on our children, and it really, really isn't fair. And when we do that, we aren't honoring who our children are supposed to be. And we're also teaching them not to honor themselves. Oh, and on Facebook, the great topic. Thank you so much, Admired Res Rose. Yes, thank you. I wish that there was a lot of people talking about this topic, and really helping parents parent from a place that feels good for them and authentically. So the other thing is that another danger kind of parenting from an ego of status is that we teach our children to develop a persona. And by them developing this persona, they don't get in touch with who they really are on the inside. And for me, that seems really, really sad, because I definitely know people that are, in their 30s and 40s, and they're just now figuring out who they are, what means what they value, what means the most to them, what are their highest priorities. And it's because this was part of their story. This was part of what they grew up with. And so as parents, I hope to make it easier on my child so that he can grow up free to develop who he's supposed to be and not necessarily who I as mama wants him to be. And the last one, the fourth one is the ego of conformity. And that's basically that we think we are product-oriented creatures and we prefer everything to go from like point A to point B. Everything has to be orderly. And so we want our children to basically conform to the way in which we've organized our life and we've organized our world. That's how you end up with children who feel like they're the black sheep of the family. And if they're not accepted, often these children either conform to be accepted, which is sad, or they end up kind of leaving the family, you know, not communicating because they don't feel heard and seen. So, that one like kind of breaks my heart too. And I don't think that it's intentional that parents parent this way. They parent often the way that they know. I think that the ego of conformity is very, very prevalent because it's just passed down. And whatever made this family unit successful, say all the kids got from point A to point B, we're like, well, our parents did it. You know, these kids turned out okay. So they keep repeating these patterns, but they are harmful. They can be harmful to the child's psyche and to who they are meant to be. And the fifth one is the ego of being in control. And this one is, I think this one probably happens more than we think. I know I can even say for myself, I definitely think that I had parents that parented this way, like the total top down. I am in control, very hierarchical, parents know best. You know, I grew up in a, you are seen and not heard environment. So when we are raised by these parents, they value emotional control more than emotional expression. In fact, expressing your emotions can be seen as being weak. And Maya Resro says, yes, my mistake as well. Oh yeah, right? Like, and it's so awesome that you are even thinking about these things. And I think it's so important that we're all growing. Like, we're all on this path towards growth and learning and becoming more fully ourselves and fully conscious of the way that we do things. So, but back to like the ego of being in control, this one really, really can, I think, harm children, because what happens is the parents exert so much control, both mentally and emotionally, and it can lead to like criticism and judgment and, demonstrating our superior knowledge. And like the child can only react like by not knowing how to feel like empowered. Like, it's hard to access their own inner empowerment. Because the parent is almighty and knows everything and knows when and when you should not express your emotions. It becomes very difficult to live in that. And I mean, I can honestly say that I don't judge my parents for doing that. I think that's what they knew, but I definitely saw parts of that even in my own experience growing up. So, it's great to be aware of them though, because before this type of work, I had no idea that these existed, and so I could be walking blindly into parenting my own children. My 21-year-old tells me this a lot, and I needed to search a lot, I think, for myself. Yes, it's so true, and you are awesome for even taking the steps to do that type of searching. So the last thing that I kind of wanted to touch on, because I told you chapter 4 is a lot. You really could have talked about each of the ego types, for a whole periscope, just dived into one. But the last thing is you can actually transition out of the ego. And one of the times that a lot of times parents start to realize that they're in ego is when they start to see that they are truly separate from their children. And a lot of times this happens when children become more independent. So one of the big stages is like when children start going to school, because when they're super young and babies, they're totally dependent upon us, and our lives really revolve around them, and often we live through them. And it's really, really easy to get caught into ego. Thank you so much for the hearts. I really, really appreciate it so much. We become unable to see that we are a separate person, and that all fuels like egoic interactions and the inability to separate your child from who they are, from who you are. And so a lot of times we can transition out of this when we see it. So we see it often when they go to school, or later in life when they go on to become like more fully independent as adults. But by that point, we've already perhaps maybe had 16 to 18 years of more egoic parenting that you're dealing with. So if you're able to see these egoic patterns earlier on in the parent-child relationship, you can work on them. And so anyway, I hope that this scope has been helpful to you all. Basically, we are reading The Conscious Parent, and I have a separate Facebook group that goes into it in more depth. You can learn more about that by visiting my website at bellaandthebabe.com/join. That's where you can get an invitation to come and talk more about this amazing book. But I will also continue doing periscopes on this topic. I think it's so, so important that we think about how we are parenting our children, and more importantly, that we take responsibility for ourselves so that we don't put our stuff on our kids, so that we can have our kids grow up just being kids and also helping us learn more about ourselves. So I thank you so, so much for the hearts. I thank you so much for joining and participating today. And if you want more information, again, my site is bellaandthebabe.com. And Myra was very helpful, even for people like me, grandparents. Thank you. Oh, I love that you're watching this. I so appreciate you, Admired Red Rose, for jumping in and your comments. And it's so helpful. I really, really am so glad you're here. So Edja says, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you guys later. I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Have an awesome day.